Get out your subbing kit, folks. We're going to be doing some stitching. You ready to run and gun? It's time for blast off. Let's go. Hey guys, Todd here with you. Welcome back to Bassin 101. Did you get your sewing kit out yet? Stitching. Man, okay, so this is part 3 of the best worming techniques that have been forgotten over the years. Now you're probably thinking, what is stitching? Stitching is nothing more than probably the absolute slowest worm technique that you'll ever fish. It'll probably drive you nuts. But it works. It really does. And get some loose line here. What stitching is, again, it's a Texas rig deal, pegged or slip sinker. It's your choice. Basically what stitching is, once that worm hits the bottom and you're letting it set for a second, you basically have a semi-slack line. You don't want complete slack, you just want semi-slack line. And then you just grab your line, believe it or not, and you just tug on it just a little bit and stop. Reel what little bit of slack you got, feel for that worm. Watch that line. These techniques are line watching, so you've got to be a good line watcher. After it sits there for a minute, take your hand, pull that line in about 6 inches to a foot, and just let it sit. Really in your slack. Let it sit there for a second. Pull your line, stitch it again. This is called stitching. This was around back in the 80s, and it wasn't very popular because it is a very slow technique. It's also a short range technique. This is not something you want to make a 100-foot cast with and then sit there and start going. That ain't going to work because you're not going to have the hook setting power. I don't care if you're using braid. You're not going to have the hook setting power. This is a short technique, 30, 40, 50 foot, as all these techniques are. And you basically just stitch that worm, let it sit. Run your slack. You can actually hold that line if you want to. Stitch it again. It's super slow, but it's very effective. I've caught, back in the day, man, I've caught a lot of bass doing that. And I've even caught them on the river doing it, even some of the videos that I shot for you guys. But I just don't think about saying what I'm doing because I just don't think about it. I haven't meant to keep it a secret. I really haven't. I just hadn't thought about it. But stitching is a very effective way for finicky fish. It's good for clear water, especially if you want to use a worm that really matches the surroundings. Let's say you got a sand bottom, you're using a pumpkin worm. This is great for that because the bass all of a sudden sees something that breaks the outline of his surroundings like everything in nature does. And that makes that bass even more curious because all he sees is this little worm just going across the bottom and stops. That's all he sees. Styles of worm, I think you're going to be better off with a straight tail worm. I really do, because you're barely moving this thing. Or some kind of a ribbon tail. The big curl tail type worms are not really the best for this kind of situation. But if that's all you have, by all means throw it. You're just not putting a lot of action on that tail. The ribbon tail will tend to kind of flutter a little bit as you're doing this. But a straight tail worm is even better because a straight tail worm is more natural and it only moves whatever it drags across the bottom. So that's just my opinion. That's the worm I've had the best success with this technique. But again, I emphasize, use the worms that you're comfortable with. Length, it doesn't really matter. You can use anything from a 4-inch worm to a 10 or 12-inch worm. It's up to you. It's what you think they might hit. But if you're going up and down the bank places, and you're fishing a Texas rig and you're not getting any hits, man, try that stitching, because that's something they just don't see. And something else that might work too is to put either a glass or a little brass bead in between the head and the worm, allow that bullet weight to tick along that rattle a little bit, or tick along that bead. It'll make it rattle and make a little bit of noise. So that's something else you could think of too. But that's what I have for that, guys. Stitching. And it's not just for sewing anymore. So anyway, until next time, guys, remember, new techniques are trendy, but bass don't change. May the Father bless you in keeping Yeshua's name, and as always, fish on.